Welcome to another edition of the Food Systems Podcast, brought to you by the Forum for the Future of Agriculture. My name is Mark Titterington, and for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to be talking to the 2025 Soil and Land Management Award winner, Benedikt Bösel, CEO and founder of Gut Bösel. Benedikt is implementing various forms of regenerative agriculture and is working to ensure that ties in startups and technology to combine both the conventional and the regenerative worlds. Benedikt, it's great to have you with us. You're no stranger, of course, to the forum. I'd like to just start, if I can, Benedikt, by taking you back to 2021 when you first addressed the forum. At that point, you talked about farming as a tool for regeneration. And since receiving the Soil Award, you spoke again at this year's forum. I'm just interested in how your vision has evolved over the last couple of years, both on the ground and in the broader policy debate about how we develop and scale regenerative agriculture.
Hi, Mark. Well, first of all, thank you for having me back. It's a pleasure to be here again. Just to jump right in, I think, as far as specifically on the ground is concerned, really not that much has changed. If anything, I've been happy to experience that, many of the ideas I had back in the day turned out to not be so bad and so stupid after all. I mean, of course, we live by our mistakes, so that's what we mostly do. But we really can see that quite a few things work really, really well. So in that case, we've been super fortunate. We built our own foundation, the Think Foundation, in 2021. Now we have a team of 15 people working on sort of the science and education part of what we're trying to do, and we've just been able to grow and continue to do so in sense of, we have now 9 different agroforestry and syntropic agroforestry systems. We've got 300 cows that are incorporated in the crop rotation. We're basically minimum tillage, arable, regenerative, organic farming. We have a tree nursery that we founded. So, we really try to use all the methods that we can to overcome the deeply sandy soil and low precipitation that we have here on the ground. And I mean, on a grander scheme, I think you always underestimate what happens. And I think we should have to be grateful that soil and agriculture has gotten so much more attention, I'd say, not only through, public, but also as far as science is concerned, political agenda in some ways. But unfortunately, there's still 2, let's say, main issues, if you ask me. First of all, I think the overarching opinion is still that, it is sustainability versus production, whereas I believe it's production because of sustainability. And I think still most of, the philosophy of agriculture and the different interest groups acting therein is to protect the status quo instead of, looking to the future with courage and to say, well, what is coming and how can we address that in the most sort of sensible way.
You've talked there, Benedikt, about sustainability gives you the productivity rather than these two things being separate. Why do you think it's so hard to get that message across, to get it understood, when it seems, at least to you and indeed to others, that it's a really obvious link?
I mean, I think that's a good question, and I think there's a lot of things that draw into it. To start with, the system that we all operate in, from the ground up into the supermarket, is one that has been defined as such and built for 50, 60, 70 years. And we can be grateful for all the developments that we've seen in there. But we have to reassess if that model is still the one that is fitting to our needs, specifically looking in the future. So that being said, I think there is a great market dynamic and interest of powerful interest groups to protect that market and to protect that setup. And then also on the farmers' side, we tend to underestimate what we actually talk about with regards to what we're asking from farmers, because it's not just agricultural related. It's not about only the crop rotation or doing this or doing that. We're talking about a deeply societal, cultural, personal shift that we're asking of farmers, right? So if you've been producing in a certain way, for 20, 30 years, and suddenly people come along and say, you know what, this is actually not good enough anymore because now we want this and we need that and whatever, whatever. Um, that goes so deeply to, oneself's view of who you are, and questioning that is deeply difficult. So bearing that in mind, we have to find ways of transformation, of education, of help, that addresses the human part of this transformation that we're all talking about. And that also is super, super difficult, because if you've grown up in a farming community, the chances are you have a very strong opinion on what is right and what is wrong, specifically when it comes to the location and the context that you're operating in. So we're talking about maybe the most difficult system that we could address, simply because it's not just agriculture. It draws into all the other systems: education, science, access to land, land ownership, and many others that have to be transformed just as much as the classical agriculture context.
I think you put your finger on something really quite important there, the social dimension of farming, of rural communities, and how views are formed. Perhaps differs, makes agriculture and food and agriculture system different to other sectors when you're looking at transition. I just wonder within that, Benedikt, how important you see evidence, the good evidence of the progress that you've been able to make. Farmers, do tend to look at other farmers and see what's working and try and adopt and often replicate. So when you look at what you've been able to achieve on your land, which approaches are showing the most tangible results in terms of soil health, the resilience, and the all-round sustainability of the farm in terms of its economics as well as the environmental output? What evidence are you seeing, Benedikt?
Well, that's also a great question. And maybe as a first comment, we work on incredibly sandy soil, and we have to fight with really fluctuating weather, specifically towards the drought side of things, unfortunately. So we are in an extreme environment. That's why we're also looking for extreme methods and tools. So the ones that we see the, let's say, strongest reaction from is, of course, agroforestry. Agroforestry, so the planting thin tree lines that are evenly dispersed over the field. Give it 2 or 3 years. Once they build some sort of biomass, the ecological benefits of those are immediately noticeable. We have quite a lot of scientific studies on that already, to see how water uptake, water storage, but also, of course, the habitat biodiversity increasing incredibly. And so we see those sort of ecological positives really, really fast. That being said, as far as the economics of it is concerned, this is the one that is most difficult. We have a focus on, planting fruit trees and nut trees in a very diverse setting. So to actually be able to analyze and talk out of own experience, lived experience, we will need another 5 to 10 years until the fruits and trees that we have planted will actually start yielding profits. But we deeply believe that they will. So that's the first one. The second one, I would say, is the integration of animals into the crop rotation. We were a classical arable farm without any animals, always being dependent on nutrients from the outside, of which we could not control the quality. We didn't really know what comes on through, getting cow manure or chicken manure, etc., etc. So having integrated our own cows into the crop rotation, not only can we kind of already start to close the nutrient cycle, but also the microbiology has an incredible effect. And through using the cows in the combination with undersown crops and cover crops, helps us keeping the system alive, and living with living roots, different roots, so high diversity, and increasing the photosynthetic capacity through the cows, and also having an incredible influence on the water storage and water uptake. So that is something that we've seen has an incredible impact, also quite fast. Here, the time, let's say, to economic proficiency is not as long as agroforestry, depending on your market, depending, of course, on your skills to sell it. But you need to build a herd first in order for it to be significant, and then you can, if you got the time and the effort to build a brand and so forth, you can bring that to an economic, let's say, state of acceptance after, let's say, 4 or 5 years. And then if you do well, you can make some money on it. That being said, I would always see the cows in that setting, which is a bit of a special setting because they integrate into the arable production, more as far as the ecological and social sort of benefits are concerned, that bring value to the arable farming. Then the next thing is plant health and composting. So we have a huge focus on really making sure that we can do anything to increase plant health, so that the plants actually build their own resilience, and through doing that, they also attribute incredible amounts and value for the soil microbiome. So looking at the plant as a tool for soil health, and that we do through different forms of composting and applying sort of micronutrients, from seeding to all kinds of sprays that we would apply before harvest, and that it's a difficult one to assess economically, because we're talking about living systems, and they might sort of differ quite a lot and vary. So the causality here is quite difficult to assess. But I think what's important for me to say is there's a big but here, right? First of all, we're talking about things that are difficult to measure, right? We cannot yet, no one, by that means, really understand those processes that are going on, right? So we are simply not capable of analyzing these complex living systems for many different reasons, which I don't want to get into too much detail. But then also we have the incredible specificity of context and region, which means something that works for me might not work for my neighbor, specifically not if it's a different production site, different production area. So with that regard, and there's a few other reasons why the things that I might experience on my farm might not be the truth, so to say. So the question, I think, that you asked is slightly wrong, or I would adapt sort of the question. I think the right question to answer, the right question to ask in that setting would be, what are the goals on your farm, and what are the methods that you use, which you believe to be most addressing those goals? What am I trying to say? It always depends on the context, and it depends on your production method, and it depends on your value system and the markets, etc., to assess which of the very many different methods you can use are the most useful in your context to achieve whatever you're looking for, if that makes any sense.
It's perfect sense, Benedikt, and as you say, all of this is context specific. With that in mind, I want to just move more towards the policy end of this now. I know, and I should have said in the beginning, you're involved in many policy discussions, not just in Germany, but across the EU and no doubt globally. When you think about, as you said, practices being context specific, goals being farm specific, and what you want to do, policymakers, of course, often look for a one size fits all approach. So when you're looking now about how Germany, how the European Union is looking to direct future support for agriculture and land use, particularly in that regenerative agriculture context. What do you want policymakers to understand and do to put in place the conditions that do enable that context-specific, long-term investment in regenerative agriculture?
Well, I guess some of it we've kind of already covered. I think the main thing for me by far is to understand sort of that we need a shift in our let's say philosophy of what agriculture is. Right now, agriculture is still seen as primary production, with the aim to produce as much as we possibly can for the cheapest possible price. And the outcomes of that are farmers that are, dying in dependencies from world market prices, input prices, subsidies, you name it. Most of them are highly in debt because they had to grow, they had to invest, they had to specialize. So now, even if they would want to change, they couldn't, right? The second outcome is that with our farming model that we have created, we have externalized costs that are outrageously high. Our farming system today is costing the next generations, as well as us already, an unpayable price. So with regard to that, we have to think very, very hard about how we can change the system to not produce that much of externalized cost. What I mean is, I guess, obvious, but like soil health, biodiversity, many of the others that I think we are all aware of. And the third part is the systems that have deeply and similarly been, let's say, misguided. And I'm saying this without wanting to point fingers. I'm saying this without having a grudge, because we can all be thankful for the system that we have created, because after war, after famines, this is what we needed as a society. But today it's time to reassess the assumptions on which we base this. And to go back to your question, I look at agriculture as probably the biggest and best tool to overcome some of the biggest problems of our time, right? So, of course, not only nutrition and food, but it is climate adaptation, it is biodiversity, it is development of rural areas, it's health, it's education. It's pretty much all of the things that we as society have to worry about and work on and develop. And I think once we understand that, once we start incorporating that in our philosophy of agriculture, we understand the potential, but also we understand how much more attention it needs, how much more capital it needs, how much more we could actually do if we overcome that idea that agriculture is something that is happening outside of the cities, and that has like negative consequences. It's simply not like that. It's simply exactly the opposite. And there's so many examples of it. So the question is really, when do we start realizing and seeing it for what it is? Just in the German context, last year we had 4 century droughts, as we call them. So droughts that come once in a century. We had 4 in 1 year. I think we spent around 11 billion euros. And of course, droughts are directly linked with soil and soil health and soil's capacity to take up water and store water. So those, let's say, linkages between our land use system and the consequences of, building it on the wrong assumptions, are becoming so much more obvious. And I just hope that this is something that we'll start incorporating into policy legislation more and more.
That leans towards systemic thinking, Benedikt, and when I say systemic, I mean across different government departments, directorates. You've touched on a few of them: climate, health, education, arguably, as well as agriculture, trade. And then I would even extend that further and say that the private sector, the economic actors have got a huge role to play in that, Do you see any evidence, or do you see any reasons, causes for optimism, confidence, that systemic thinking is beginning to emerge?
Well, the saying, to be a farmer, you have to be an optimist. Um, it's a good question. I mean, I see, and I think most of us, why what we're talking about is incredibly challenging, and it's not easy to, believe that we'll be able to do so fast enough and well enough in the setting that we all live and work by. Um, but for some reason I cannot really explain to you, I am convinced that we will do it. I think, first of all, the outcomes and the consequences of the wrong system will become more and more apparent. It will get more and more dangerous. It will get more and more difficult, and we will feel it much closer to home than we used to. So I think that will have hopefully an accelerated impact on all actors, from political through companies, but specifically also societal. That will all say we really kind of have to do something here. And then I believe that there is some. I think we will reach a certain threshold of understanding, if I can say it like that, where suddenly there's a large enough group of us that say we need to act and we want to act, and that will be giving an impulse throughout the whole of society in that sense to really act and and just get it right in the very last moment, and it will already be kind of too late. I don't I'm not naive here, but I think we will still be able to make it in a way where we will learn and then we grow from. In some sense, I always say the 21st the 21st century is going to be difficult, but the 22nd is going to be beautiful. So it's a daunting task for sure. But I think there are some things that we can do and that have already an incredible impact. And that for me would be to look at the true cost of counting, and at the same time analyze the true values of production that farmers already bring into the field every day. And if we can not only monitor them, but also monetize them and connect them to the different production systems, I think we can use the same sort of economic system that we have to incentivize a production that is more in line with the ecological context and the societal needs, so to say.
It's always great to finish these podcasts on a positive and an optimistic note, and I do appreciate your projection that if the 21st century is challenging, the 22nd century will be beautiful. That is the obligation, of course, that all of us have, and is a big driver behind the forum. Benedikt, I could spend another 40 minutes and more talking to you and delving into some of the ideas and concepts you've shared with us. But for now, I'm going to hold it there and just express our deep thanks again to you, Benedikt, and also our congratulations again on winning the Soil and Land Management Award. It was great to have you at our annual conference, and I do hope you'll come and talk to us again sometime soon.
Thank you, Mark. Absolute pleasure.
Thanks so much. Benedikt Bösel, CEO, co-founder and CEO of Gut Bösel, winner, as I said, of the 2025 Soil and Land Management Award. Well, you've been listening to another edition of the Food Systems Podcast. We very much enjoyed having you with us. We hope you've enjoyed the conversation we've just had with Benedikt. Please do join us again next time.